Hey everyone, welcome into our Wednesday webinar series here. My name's Anthony. I'm a senior analyst here with CyberData Pros. I'm here with my colleague Alex,
Hi,
who's going to
everyone.
be discussing, with me today, ISO 27001. And as you may or may not know, there's a new version, 2022 edition, that's been released within the about past year and a half or so. But
Yeah,
with the deadline pending in the near future for kind of the last call for the 2013 edition, we figured be a great time to kind of talk about what some of the differences are, what that transition looks like, as 2013 is going to be phased out, and you'll have to transition. So, Alex, why don't you kind of maybe just give us a little, intro on ISO?
yeah, absolutely. So, hi, everyone. Like you said, we're going to talk about some of the differences between ISO 2013 and 2022 here. Uh, Give some general guidance on what to look for when you're preparing for 2022, how to prepare for it if you haven't done ISO before, and just answer some general questions about the standard. It's new to a lot of us. It's been around for around a year now, but we have some deadlines coming up to the end of 2013. So, of course, we want to get ahead of the game where we can. So, before we get too in the weeds about 2022, let's get a good foundation for ISO 27001 or a refresher if you might know it already. ISO 27001 is essentially a framework that describes how to create a information security management system, what we call an ISMS. In specific terms, this often is just a policy document with establishing organizational entities that support it, but more broadly, it kind of works as a general information security framework that internationally for businesses of many sectors can be used to maintain a respectful security and privacy posture. Um, this is a standard that businesses can be audited on and actually certified with, in contrast to something like SOC 2. And those certifications are becoming increasingly in demand in recent years. We've seen in an ISO survey, it's actually gone up consistently 25% each year, the past couple of years, and that trend's likely to continue because we see a number of benefits typically whenever someone gets certified by this standard. It increases, the security and privacy posture benefits speak for themselves. They help reduce costs of data breach or compliance issues. The better understanding of your system helps make future controls being implemented more efficient, and it helps just increase employee productivity we see in a lot of cases. So there's a lot of reason people are pursuing these certifications, and the issue we're facing here is a lot more people are looking for the standard, but the standard is evolving. Around every 10 years or so, ISO does some major revisions. Sometimes it's just wording changes, sometimes it's entirely new controls. And of course, the old standard goes out of date at that point. Everyone needs to be up to date to maintain a current ISO cert, and that's the timeline we're facing now. Um, as of May 1st, 2024, new additions or new certifications to ISO in general will all have to be by the 2022 standard. They won't allow you to get your initial certification by 2013 at that point. And by October 31st, 2025, even if you have an ISO certification already in 2013, it will need to be brought over to the 2022 standard. Otherwise, 2013's certifications will be out of date. So, of course, we've got around a year and some change to make a transition. And we're going to look today and see what some of the new elements and merged elements are that we need to account for in this process. So, um, before we go into the entirety of the more technical differences, let's get a brief idea of what the standard of 2013 looks like for reference. So ISO in 2013 is constituent of Um, 11 clauses numbered 0 through 10. These specify the requirements an ISMS has to have in order to be ISO compliant. These are mandated by ISO. Any organization that wants to be certified by ISO needs to meet these clauses. And then we have an annex, of which there are 14 sections, and each of these sections specifies controls that can be put in place, security procedures or options, things like encryption, MFA, what have you, that go on to support the clauses that you specified. And these annexes, depending on the auditor, they can be deemed applicable to different organizations in different markets. Obviously, if you don't perform software development, there's a whole annex committed to software development that won't be applicable to you. The annexes are a lot more specified to the company at hand.
So I think the clauses those are straight across the board mandatory, and like you said, and so the difference I think with the annex, as you mentioned, just to clarify, so that is kind of malleable to different organizations to an extent. Of course, with a valid reason, you can't just opt out of all the Annex A controls, but the clauses certainly are across the board.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, where we hear the quote a lot: ISO is about progress, not perfection.
Right.
Some people get overwhelmed at first looking at these huge lists of controls and thinking they need absolutely everything there. That's often not the case. It's really about meeting the clauses and taking the annexes as practices to better meet those year after year, to continuously refine on it. And as far as 2022 changes from 2013, a lot of the structure remains similar in terms of how you will be audited and the philosophy behind progress, not perfection. There's just in the specifics of the controls themselves and some clause items, there's been a number of items that have been merged and a solid little handful of new items to look for. And to that end, if we want to drop into more specifics, I think Anthony here has um, some wording around that.
Yeah, definitely. I think and that's kind of the main reason. Hopefully that you're here, then we'll be able to give you some insight and help clarify and ease this transition. So, kind of to explore at a high level first, in terms of what those changes are look like. So there's a slight change in the actual formal title of the standard. So the new full title is ISO IEC 27001 2022, information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. So a little bit different wording there, but for all intents and purposes, this is the same standard as the 2013 version, just newer revision. Alex mentioned the clauses, the mandatory clauses. The changes here are really minor for the most part. They all remain the same in terms of what each clause is from 4 through 10. With really the changes that were implemented in terms of this area are kind of a lot of just wording and phrasing stuff. Couple additions in terms of like maybe a subclause or something like that, but really nothing that fundamentally changes anything. But we'll get into a little bit more detail there. The real bulk of the changes though comes with the Annex A controls. And so what these are a direct reflection of ISO 27002, which is not a certification by which an organization can get certified against, but it serves as kind of detailed guidance on all these different controls. So if you actually look at the document of the ISO standard for 27001, you'll see that for Annex A, it references that the controls are directly derived from ISO 27002. And so with the updates there, kind of to break it into some numbers here, the total number of controls have decreased. So previously there were 114, and this has gone down to 93. Um, doesn't necessarily mean that audits, easier by any means, but for various reasons, especially in IT and tech, 2013 to 2022, that's a long time. A lot can
Right.
change, as we all know.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but to break that down even further, so 23 of the Annex A controls were renamed to kind of reflect, current phrasing and terminology, current events, trends, developments, that sort of thing. Um, some of this reduction in total controls comes from the fact that there were 57 controls that were merged down to 24 controls. So there were various, pieces that were broken out that they've now combined and solidified into, one control. And so that's really where that deduction and total number comes into play. And then really the big thing in terms of what's new for you, there were 11 controls added that were not they're not renamed or revised, but these are brand new that were not on 2013. And so that's kind of the going to be the really the main focus, hopefully, of familiarizing everyone with what those are and what they look like. And then finally, there's 35 controls that remain completely unchanged that are still directly relevant, applicable to today. And so those ones are the same. The other kind of organizational revamping that they did was with the Annex A controls, the organization and categorization of those themselves. Previously, there were, I think, was it 14 sections, very kind of specific on, different areas within, information security.
Right.
And these were definitely geared toward more understanding from IT professionals, and what ISO did for the 2022 version is kind of revise this so that it's digestible and easy to understand by everyone and management, or who might be interacting or contributing or participating in some way to their organization's ISO audit and certification. And so what these four have been reduced to, or um, revised to, I should say, we've got organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. So every Annex A control will fall into one of those four categories. And so, again, the purpose of this, I think, really is to help, simplify things in terms of, understanding what's what, and how that can apply to the organization. As Alex mentioned before, too, uh, you know, all of the controls don't have to necessarily be implemented. This will vary by your company, your organization, your industry, your size, all sorts of factors. But most of them will probably come into play. Uh, but again, this is something that one of the crucial initial first pieces of required material is the statement of applicability, and that's kind of where you go through and deem what you believe is not applicable or out of scope, and then if, have a valid reason, a documented reason. Um, like a good example, I would say would be remote work and physical office location, kind of
Right.
that breakdown there. If there's no office location and the company is fully remote, probably don't need to worry about the controls for surveillance cameras or alarm systems at the office building if it doesn't exist, obviously.
One thing I think might be relevant too with 2022, now that there's less controls, with many of the requirements from existing controls merging, that even within one control, maybe now if one control's access control, something like that, not everything within that one control has to be 100% there, right? You might implement a number of other access controls, but not VPN if it's not applicable to your organization. So I'd say even at a control level, it seems like now that there's more of a sliding scale of how compliant you are with every individual one.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. It's definitely not a one size fits all um, approach here. And so, with that, to kind of break down the details of what these changes are. So, when we're looking at clauses 4 through 10, um, there's some, again, even the more significant changes within the clauses are still minor in terms of their actual impact or effect on what that means in practice. So to kind of run through these, some of the more significant would be clause 4.2, which is understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Essentially, what they did here is added a new subclause that requires an analysis of which of the interested party requirements are going to be addressed through the ISMS. Then we've got 4.4, which is the Information Security Management System, or again, ISMS for short. Just added a little language here that requires the company to identify those necessary processes and kind of how they interact with the ISMS. So, it's kind of essentially it's calling out that it must include the processes that underpin the ISMS and that are specific to your organization too, not just the ones dictated by ISO. We've got 6.2 with a small update, just add some additional guidance on how information security objectives are approached, provides a little more clarity, I think, about how the objectives within your information security management system should be monitored regularly and also documented as well. 6.3 is the planning of changes. This one is a new addition that essentially adds a clause that sets a standard around planning for changes. So anytime that there's going to be a change of any sort to the ISMS, it needs to be adequately planned for and kind of through a formal change management process almost would be the best way to describe it, I think. I see Alex nodding his head over here. I think he's in agreement.
I think to that end, because change management before was largely relegated to the annexes. I think this is sort of an indication that change management is probably going to become more of a major requirement in ISO audits to come.
Yeah, I agree. We've got clause 8.1, which is operational planning and control. This section just adds some additional guidance to the operational planning and control that now requires the establishment of criteria for actions determined in clause 6, as well as control those actions in accordance with the criteria. And of course, so clause 6 refers to the planning process of the standard. Couple more, 8.1, or I'm sorry, 9.3, we've got management review. These are the kind of, you establish a risk council or a team of, leaders or stakeholders from various departments that kind of all oversee and monitor the ISMS as a whole. And so with this adjustment here, it adds to some clarity to, there's a list of requirements in the 2013 version of certain agenda items, if you will, that must be addressed at every management review meeting, which typically is going to be quarterly when these occur. But the purpose is so that there aren't areas that are glossed over or overlooked. It kind of just ensures that, in going through this meeting agenda, you're touching on these specific areas that ISO wants. And so those are all the same from 2013, except for the addition of a couple areas as well. And those specifically are consideration of changes in needs and expectations of interested parties that are relevant to the ISMS. So, just adding that in there to kind of give a little more depth to what's discussed. There's several more, minor changes of adding a removing the word "and" here or there, or changing, term to another word. But of course, we won't get into all the depth of that. But that really accounts for kind of the more significant, but still, again, pretty minor overall changes to the clauses. And so from there, moving on to the Annex A controls. Again, these are really what comes down to the main portion here of the long list of controls that we kind of delved into. Like I said a little while ago, the new 4 sections or themes are organizational, people, physical, and technological controls. And just as kind of a little breakdown there of how many of that total number where it's spaced out, we've got 37 controls in organizational, 8 in people controls, 14 in physical, and then finally 34 in technological theme. And so we'll go through, again, we won't get into rephrasing or too much into, which ones were merged. Really what we want to focus on is the new ones, and are that are, something that an organization, even if, again, you already are certified with ISO 27001, the 2013 version. So you may be familiar with the standard, but you will have to, again, transition to this new version, which is, not as simple as, a one-to-one match. You will have to go through an audit again, and transition audit, and everything like that. So really our aim here is to kind of outline and help with what those specifics are that, we need to be sure that are covered. The first edition is 5.7, which is threat intelligence. Essentially, this involves, collecting, analyzing, contextualizing data regarding existing or emerging threats out in the wild. Typically, this is done through it could be a government agency, information sharing, collaborative, groups, like, or even private vendors that provide that. But it's gathering this intel on threats so that you can better prepare the organization, for hopefully preventing some of those attacks, and then at the very least reducing some of the impact that they may have. So just being aware of all these trends and events that are occurring, and kind of having some data to act on, I think, which your organization may very well already be doing. And so this could be an easy one. But it's definitely an important one.
I believe the previous ISO version even had a control on keeping security staff up to date with emerging trends. So if you have a method for that, it could probably be merged somewhat or intertwined with this.
Yeah, that's a good point. The next edition is 5.23, which is focused on information security for the use of cloud services. Of course, even from 2013 to now, cloud use has taken over exponentially. Essentially everything these days runs in the cloud, if not hybrid. And so adding a dedicated section to this specifically is, of course, makes a whole lot of sense, in my opinion, in terms of relevancy to what the industry is like currently. So it just kind of proactively creates a process for the use, the management of cloud services. Of course, think of cloud services as the bigger providers like AWS or a Google Cloud platform, Azure, these sorts of things. And they kind of bring with them, that shared responsibility model that is often talked about. Um, but this just kind of really hones in on that and focuses on outlining what those security responsibilities are for the parties, and defining them, and really having this fleshed out, in terms of how you're going to translate, those same concerns and standards for protecting data and systems as if they were locally in your IT server room on site. Next, we've got 5.30, which is information and communication technology for business continuity. So, business continuity, if you're familiar with the 2013 version, this is nothing new in terms of something that's addressed, but this new clause addition specifically, is really focusing on the outcome of like a BIA, a business impact analysis, and kind of looking at that through the lens of, should there be some sort of disaster or disruptive event that, um, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, ruins not ruin it could ruin the availability of your assets and your systems, and really disrupt that, and kind of seeing, out having a process in place that outlines that response, that recovery procedure, restoration, as well as taking into account metrics like a recovery time objective or recovery point objective, and just really helps maintain that preparedness for you know continuous operation even in the face of disaster. 7.4 is physical security monitoring, which was added. So this one is pretty straightforward. Again, if you have an office, this would apply to you specifically, but just focuses on specifically having some form of continuous monitoring available for the premises to kind of detect and deter, unauthorized access. This could be in multiple different forms, but some examples could be CCTV or surveillance cameras, motion sensors, alarms, even manpower, guards, that sort of thing. Just some way of continuously monitoring, the access to the physical location. We've got 8.9 configuration management. Really, this one again is not something that has been unheard of to this point. It's just formalizing it, but that across the organization's networks and systems and endpoints, establishing that kind of baseline for those security standards that can be deployed, and really reduce or even eliminate the ad hoc adjusting and configuring things differently, across different things.
I can see why this one probably has been brought up in recent years, especially with remote work being increased so much more as it was since 2013. If you're not physically handing everyone their pre-set up laptop, this has become more of a challenge nowadays. And so this probably is an item, if you don't already have something of a plan for, it's a good one to start thinking ahead about as we approach 2025.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes, I think it's a efficiency and time saver too.
Oh,
For the IT help desk, they're definitely happy about having a standard or baseline to kind of roll out on these different things. A couple of these next ones are kind of directly intertwined, but they are all new. So you've got 810, which is information deletion. This is just basically talking about data retention periods and policies. And so, historically, I think companies have had a knack of kind of holding on to as much data as possible for as long as possible. But as regulations and statutes and whatnot around privacy are continuing to evolve and get rolled out, that's something that kind of having to be, a wake up call for a lot of big companies that, once that information or data they've gathered on you isn't needed any longer, that, it's deleted or and removed. And so this clause is outlining the requirement of having and following a procedure and policy of that. Again, closely related to that is 811, which is data masking. This is essentially a method of protecting that sensitive or PII data that is stored by your organization, whether that be through pseudonymization, anonymization, uh, encryption, tokenization, whatever method. There's lots of different ways to go about this, but essentially that it's protecting that data and not just keeping it accessible to everyone in plain text. Um, and so, think like obfuscation. That's, I think, a good way to sum that one up. And then 812 is data leakage prevention. You might have heard of DLP before, which essentially is going to be a tool that's used both to detect and prevent, hopefully, in different instances of exfiltration of data, whether it be malicious or even just accidental, and really can detect and even stop, depending on the how it's configured, if certain data meeting different requirements or format is attempted to be moved or shared or accessed somewhere else or with another system or entity, and kind of puts up a warning sign and stops that from happening. I think a good example of this would be like social security numbers, for example, that unique numerical format of the three digits, the hyphen, the two digits, hyphen, and so it can kind of detect that if Alex, if I tried to send you a social security number, data containing social security numbers, hopefully it would, the intent here would be to stop that.
Yeah. And I'd say with this one and the last few in the 8.10 range, it's particularly timely for now because as new states' rights and privacy laws get enacted, they're asking for a lot of these very similar things. So depending where you're doing business, a lot of these controls you're going to be held liable to, if not now, in the near future. So they'll kind of go hand in hand. And specifically with like DLP, even they don't require that in all these privacy frameworks, but they often do look for ways to, they'll want explanations for how you're preventing data from being breached. And with those kind of solutions where you can input like models for customer records and show like we have technical controls in place to prevent these things, I think this is a good example of how ISO and uh, even privacy frameworks can go hand in hand and support each other.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, and then we've got a few more. So that we'll kind of run through here. We've got 8.16, which is monitoring activities. And so this one is definitely very wide open and broad in terms of monitoring what that means. Of course, there's a million ways to monitor a million different things, but I think the intention here is to that there's just systems in place to kind of detect and correct different risks through observing and you know monitoring, as the term states, uh, kind of like those unusual activities or anomalous behaviors of sorts. And, again, this could apply to things like network traffic, inbound and outbound. It could apply to security logs, admin or root access actions that have been taken, even things like resource utilization of storage capacity or processor out, that sort of thing. Really, there's, again, you could spend an entire day talking about just this clause, but the purpose really is to hopefully allow for some speedier resolutions and detections to any sort of incident events, that ultimately will help protect the security and privacy of your company. And then we've got 823, which is web filtering. Um, this one specifically is referring to the different, software that can be used to restrict access to, certain sites or types of sites, which really helps from malware attacks or data breaches. Um, the other angle of this too can also be from a, efficiency and business perspective as well of, blocking sites that don't really have a explicit, business use. So you may work for a company or have worked for a company that, when you're on their network, prohibits social media sites or sports or gambling, illegal sites, peer-to-peer sharing, that sort of thing, to kind of protect, and prohibit that as well. And then the last edition is Secure Coding 8.28. And hopefully, this is something that's already been top of mind and in practice for a while. But if not, now it's required. So, really, what this is thinking is, as if you do develop software, as you're going through that development life cycle, that security is a piece of that puzzle along every step of the way. And it's not something that is done, post code writing, because then you've got to go back and potentially there's multiple vulnerabilities that didn't even realize or just weren't exactly concerned with at the time. And so the real goal here is to kind of prevent that, and by having security top of mind from the get go as you write your application, your code, that it will refrain from having that to begin with, hopefully.
Yeah. Pushing for that whole idea of security by design. We've been hearing for years.
Yeah. And so with that, those are the 11 new ones. And, again, that's really the main things that we needed to discuss in terms of hopefully, helping clarify and educate on, what's new. Again, everything, all in all, the standard is the standard. It's more or less the same, asking the same things of your company, your business, but with some updates to the specifics as they relate to today's industries and society as it relates to security. So some might be a heavy lift for some companies. Some of you may be thinking, "Man, this is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be."
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I find a lot of these, at least I was relieved to see there's nothing really majorly new process wise that these controls are trying to push out. A lot of them kind of are just small extensions to annexes already existing. And truth told, if you've been doing ISO for a little bit now, you probably are already en route to having a framework to incorporate these as you go. So I don't think this will represent a huge obstacle if you're already doing well with ISO compliance. And if you're already aiming for that point, with a gap analysis, you should be able to find a way to incorporate these controls pretty easily with the existing framework.
yeah, no, definitely. I think that's the key here is that you know, especially as you said, if you're familiar with ISO, then you're probably going to be, or even just information security in general. These concepts are not evolutionary, unheard of things here that you very well may already be practicing and have implemented. So hopefully, again, this won't be something a major shift or disruption to kind of get these into place if they're not already. But that kind of sums up our analysis or explanation of those detailed findings. So I'll kind of turn it back to Alex to close us out here and maybe just give us a little brief rundown on kind of so putting these changes into practice. What does that look like? How can you kind of get ready for the changes, because again, you may be grandfathered in for a little while, but soon enough everyone will have to upgrade. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, looking forward, if you're looking for some practical steps of just what next to look at, I think it would really start by revisiting your ISMS. That's the one thing, of course, with the standard changing and the ISMS being pretty closely tied to the standard. You'll want to touch back on that, see how some of the wording adjustments might affect that. Um, Again, usually not, based on the new controls we talked about, there's nothing game changing that we need in order to add. We just want to make sure that the language is adjusted correctly. Same with our statements of applicability going forward. That should assess any of the clause changes really. I think beyond that, a gap assessment, whether done, they have these transition audits that a lot of auditing bodies can perform now. If you're getting recertified, they will go ahead and look at 2022 standards also and see how you meet up with those and help you some guidance if you don't. Um, but even if you've already done that earlier and just want to get ahead of the game, an internal gap assessment just by those 11 new controls uh, shouldn't be a lengthy process. And it can go a long way in highlighting what changes need to be made. Uh, I think in terms of existing documentation you might have, if you're going to find places to focus to revisit, it seems like change management is something that's being and the clauses a little more hammered in again between the need for ISMS relevant changes to be documented there. Of course, also the idea of business impact analysis being formalized, or something like that clause amendment that like any economic changes being factored in to that might affect ISMS being considered. I think that's a policy revisit, along with business continuity, just formalizing that business impact analysis format. We've talked for a while that you have to back up these business continuity and incident response plans, and that's typically our suggested way of doing so. So if that's an exercise you're not performing already, it might be a good idea to try one of those. Beyond that, I think for like real practical advice, those would be the major ones. Beyond that, I suggest in your own right, if you get a chance, look at those 11 controls yourselves. Look at a few ways that they could be um, well fit to your organization. Again, I think controls nowadays are moving a little more to being on a sliding scale. Different organizations will have different measures that will put them in better compliance with certain controls. And so just looking at them and thinking of them in context to your organization, how, what does threat intelligence look like for your company versus another one? Same with the privacy controls. So I'd encourage you to think about it so on your own right. But beyond that, that's all I've got. If we want to take any questions, if we got any, or
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to throw those into the chat. Or if not, you can always reach out to us through email, which will be shared with the webinar as well. But again, I think to kind of sum it all up, if you're familiar with ISO 27001, this isn't a scorched earth, revamp of what you've come to know. There's definitely some stuff added. Again, some other stuff merged. So structurally, it adds and changes some things, but really overall, it's the same in a lot of ways.
continuation of what we've already been pushing forward with ISO for a long time.
Yeah, just kind of updating some of the more current or modern things associated with it. But yeah, I think if doing definitely start with some sort of gap analysis, as Alex said, and kind of see what you're missing. this will be obviously a much easier lift if you have the 2013 certification already. But the good thing is too, if you're pursuing ISO or going to pursue ISO in the near future, you can already go ahead and opt to just get started right away with the 2022 version, and save yourself some time to rather than opting for, well, we'll do 2013s, it's a little bit older and easier, but it depends subjectively, of course. But the downside of that, of course, would be you'd have to update before you even finish that 3-year cycle. So again, it's been out for a while now, 2022, but just really wanted to focus in some time on the relevancy of it because of the deadlines coming up to opt or to that will invalidate that 2013 version. So hopefully we helped explain some things today, and everyone was able to learn something and get some clarity on what all's involved. But I think that's about it for us, Alex. Unless you have anything else to add.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, and definitely reach out to us, CyberData Pros, for a free consultation if you're not sure or how to get started or want some help to get started. We've got the guidance for you. We know what the auditors are looking for, what type of evidence, how to prepare, what these things look like in practice. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. Again, the information is going to be attached to the details of this webinar that you can read in the description. But thanks everyone for your time. Have a great day.
Take care.